When I first stumbled upon Kadampa Buddhism, I wasn't searching for anything particularly exotic or foreign. I wanted something practical, something I could sink my teeth into without having to wade through layers of cultural baggage. I didn't need another tradition full of rituals I didn't understand or feel connected to. What I was looking for was wisdom that would make sense of the world I was living in. That's why when I came across modern Buddhist teachings adapted to today's Western society, it clicked. It wasn't wrapped up in the nostalgia of old Tibetan customs or politics. There was no butter tea ceremony, no deep dive into feudal Tibetan history. I'm not knocking those things. They just weren't relevant to me. In fact, I wasn't looking to escape my own world. I've never really felt drawn to those far-off spiritual journeys that require you to leave everything behind, as if enlightenment only exists in some distant monastery on the other side of the world. Honestly, there are more than enough problems here. Racism, poverty, immigrant rights, these are the issues I've grown up around, and they're not going anywhere. So when I found Buddhism, it wasn't an escape. It was more like a tool, a framework that helped me deal with the messiness of life, not run from it. I grew up in a religious household, the daughter of a Baptist minister, and while there was plenty of spirituality in my upbringing, there was always a sense of rigidity, of needing to follow a prescribed path. Buddhism, on the other hand, felt like an invitation to think critically, to ask the questions that had been bubbling inside me for years. And that was a relief. I could focus on the teachings, the core principles, without getting bogged down in anything that didn't directly apply to my life. That's what kept me coming back. You see, I wasn't after a new identity or a new cultural experience. What drew me in were the teachings, plain and simple. They were relevant, applicable, and most importantly, they addressed the reality of the world I was living in. Life isn't some abstract puzzle. It's a series of decisions, challenges, and actions. Buddhism gave me the tools to navigate that with a bit more grace and clarity. The teachings of Kadampa Buddhism emphasize engaging with the world compassionately rather than renouncing it. This approach resonated with Ani Jamgyal, who found in the new Kadampa tradition, NKT, a form of Buddhism that was not only spiritually fulfilling, but also accessible to Western practitioners. Founded by Geshe Kelsang Gyatso in 1991, the NKT adapts traditional Buddhist teachings for contemporary life, allowing individuals to connect with profound philosophies without the complexity of foreign languages or cultures. This adaptation has led to a rapid expansion of the NKT, with over 1,200 centers worldwide, including new temples in major cities across the globe. Ani was particularly drawn to the NKT for its structured study program and simplified ordination process, requiring only 10 vows compared to the hundreds typical in other traditions. This accessibility made her decision to become a nun much easier, as she felt that without the NKT, she may never have pursued ordination. However, Ani later discovered that the NKT was intertwined with the sectarian disputes of Tibetan Buddhism. Initially seeking a straightforward path, she found herself in the midst of complex political and religious dynamics, particularly surrounding the figure of Kelsang Gyatso, who was viewed as the sole authority within the NKT. Kelsang Gyatso's teachings are regarded as pure Dharma, and NKT members are expected to adhere strictly to them, often at the expense of acknowledging other spiritual leaders, including the Dalai Lama. This dogmatic stance was unsettling for Ani, who had hoped to engage with a non-dogmatic spiritual practice. The NKT's alignment with Kelsang Gyatso also involved a rejection of broader Tibetan Buddhist teachings and figures, creating a divide that was politically charged and rooted in a long history of conflict over the role of the deity Dorje Shugden. Dorje Shugden, a deity associated with the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, has been a focal point of controversy. His worship was advocated by conservative figures like Pabanka, who aimed to preserve the purity of the Gelug tradition against the growing ecumenical movement of the early 20th century, which sought to promote a more inclusive understanding of Tibetan Buddhism. The NKT's emphasis on Shugden worship positioned it in opposition to the more inclusive perspectives that many Tibetan Buddhists now embrace. Despite the NKT's growth and its appeal as a modern form of Buddhism, Ani's journey illustrates the tensions inherent in this tradition. While the NKT provides valuable teachings and practices for addressing contemporary issues, the underlying sectarian conflicts challenge its claims of being a straightforward, modern alternative. For Ani and others committed to the NKT, the challenge remains to navigate these complexities while promoting compassion and understanding in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, the NKT offers a path that appeals to Western practitioners seeking spiritual engagement, but it also requires a careful examination of its historical and political contexts. After the Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959, his views evolved as he embraced the inclusive spirit of the Rimé movement, which sought unity among all Tibetan Buddhist schools. This change led to significant tensions within the Gelug tradition, especially among those who remained devoted to the worship of Dorje Shugden. The Dalai Lama eventually urged Gelug practitioners to abandon Shugden worship, creating friction with followers, particularly disciples of Trijang Rinpoche. Among these was Kelsang Gyatso, who, feeling betrayed, broke away from the mainstream Gelug establishment to establish the new Kadampa tradition, NKT, in 1991, positioning it as a distinctly Western form of Buddhism. For many NKT practitioners, Kelsang Gyatso represents the last bastion of pure Buddhism, with some believing it is their only chance to access undiluted teachings. This urgency fostered a close-knit community, but also contributed to the NKT's reputation for sectarianism. Ani Jamgyal, a follower, found it disheartening to discover that the NKT was entrenched in historical and political conflicts, which conflicted with her desire for a straightforward spiritual path. David K. compares Kelsang Gyatso to Atisha, a revered 11th century sage, viewing him as a guardian of Buddhism in a spiritually compromised world. Many NKT members are deeply suspicious of other Buddhist teachings, even those from Kelsang Gyatso's own teachers, leading to an insular approach that discourages engagement with other texts to maintain purity. This strict adherence demands that NKT teachers faithfully reproduce Kelsang Gyatso's texts, leaving little room for personal interpretation. The NKT's focus on maintaining a pure lineage, alongside the practice of Dorje Shugden worship, has put it at odds with the broader Tibetan Buddhist community. The conflict intensified when the Dalai Lama labeled Dorje Shugden a malevolent spirit, prompting Kelsang Gyatso's expulsion from Serajé Monastic University in 1996 due to accusations of slander against the Dalai Lama. In response, the NKT asserted that the Dalai Lama's rejection of Shugden constituted religious oppression, leading to public demonstrations and letter-writing campaigns aimed at defending their practice. Shugden had become integral to the NKT's identity, with Kelsang Gyatso teaching that the deity was not merely a protector but a Buddha. The NKT's protests reached a peak in 2015 during the Dalai Lama's US tour, with members vocally asserting their views on religious freedom. For many in the NKT, these protests were not just about Shugden, they symbolized a struggle for the future of Buddhism itself. Jen Kelsang Kanden, a longtime disciple, expressed deep disillusionment with the Dalai Lama, accusing him of abandoning the Gelug lineage and its followers. NKT practitioners perceive their conflict with the Dalai Lama as both spiritual and political, viewing themselves as protectors of pure Buddhism against perceived corruption. Despite claims of persecution faced by Shugden devotees, investigations by organizations like Amnesty International found little evidence of human rights abuses against them. Interestingly, in China, authorities have encouraged Shugden worship, complicating the political landscape surrounding this issue. Reports suggest that China has used the Shugden controversy to undermine the Dalai Lama's authority while positioning itself favorably in discussions about his future reincarnation. In summary, the NKT's identity and practices are deeply rooted in the contentious relationship with the Dalai Lama and the broader Tibetan Buddhist community. This has fostered a distinct insular tradition that many followers feel is vital to preserving what they view as the true essence of Buddhism amidst external challenges and internal conflicts. Kanden is convinced that the Dalai Lama is suppressing religious freedom and damaging his own spiritual lineage. He notes, in the Tibetan exile community in India, Buddhism has become politicized, emphasizing the commitment of NKT members to defend what they see as a threatened way of life. However, Ani Jamgyal, after years with the NKT, began to recognize the troubling implications of Kelsang Gyatso's feud with the Dalai Lama. She felt pressured to publicly oppose the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile, which led her to leave the organization in 2011. While she initially appreciated Kelsang Gyatso's teachings, she struggled to separate them from the political context surrounding them. Jamgyal described feeling isolated from the broader Buddhist community, likening the experience of reading works by other teachers to doing something naughty. This realization prompted her to reevaluate her involvement in the NKT, which she found increasingly restrictive. Renato Barajas, another former monk, echoed Jamgyal's experience, revealing that the NKT presents a welcoming facade but becomes more controlling as one becomes more involved. He pointed out the discrepancy between the NKT's public image and its internal dynamics,